They told him not to do it. Not his team, not the funding board, not even the military who secretly backed the research under 10 different Black Ops names. No, they didn't care. They needed it done. They needed a win. Humanity was bleeding on too many fronts. Economic collapse, overpopulation, a sky filled with junked satellites and silent stations. The Earth wasn't dying. It was being suffocated. And he was the man they chose to punch a hole in the universe and find a way out. His name was Grayson Thorne. 46, bitter, brilliant, and just barely holding it together. The kind of man who could code blindfolded, who spoke in equations more comfortably than in words. His wife left 5 years ago. His son didn't speak to him anymore. But none of that mattered now. Because today, he was going to light the goddamn sky on fire. They stood around him in the observation chamber. Cold air, synthetic light, silence thick as steel. The drive was in the hangar below, 7 stories tall, thrumming low like some ancient beast ready to wake. The prototype ship, the Vandal, was built around it, sleek, brutal, black as sin. "This isn't a jump drive," Grayson had warned the brass last month. "This isn't like what the Crane or the Zolari use. This doesn't fold space. It doesn't drift through quantum ghost lanes." "Well, then what the hell does it do?" General Harrow had snapped. Grayson had leaned in and whispered, "It rips space apart, forces it to obey, tears the fabric and stitches it back wrong." They thought he was being dramatic. But he wasn't. The science behind it came from a dying alien ship that crashed into Mars orbit 20 years ago. The pilots melted inside their suits, like they knew they weren't supposed to share their secrets. The tech was fragmented, half erased, encoded in a language made to confuse. But Grayson figured it out. He always did. The trick wasn't moving through space. It was making space move around you. And that's what made it dangerous. Because when the prototype engine spun up, it didn't just create thrust. It rewrote physics. Temporarily. Violently, indifferently. Laws meant to be sacred became suggestions, and those caught too close were obliterated, or worse, changed in ways no one could explain. "This is madness," whispered Dr. Keller, one of the last engineers who hadn't already resigned or disappeared into NDA silence. "Madness is sitting on a dying rock waiting for extinction," Grayson replied, flat. "This is salvation. The ugly kind." The countdown began. The Vandal's core glowed like a second sun behind armored walls. No pilot on board, just a drone brain and the new nav system patched in through code Grayson had barely tested. But it didn't matter. This was the jump that would change everything. He didn't breathe as the timer hit 0. There was no explosion, no flash of light, just absence. 1 second the ship was there, massive, humming, terrifying, and the next it was not. It wasn't gone. It wasn't invisible. It had moved, instantaneously, without warning, without drift. They stared at the empty hangar. A moment later, alarms screamed. Space-time sensors cracked. The air smelled like copper and ozone and something else. Fear, maybe. 10 seconds later, they got telemetry. The Vandal was now orbiting Proxima Centauri, 4 light-years away, in 10 seconds. That's when the panic started. Not from Earth, from the stars. An alien message broke through every known frequency, and some unknown ones, too. A language no one had heard before, but everyone understood. Who activated the forbidden engine? The message didn't come in words. Not exactly. It came in pulses, harmonics, layered signals that made the teeth ache and the skull feel like it was vibrating from the inside. It bypassed every firewall, hijacked every satellite, and rang through the deep net like a god knocking on glass. The alien languages in their databases, dozens of them, collected from treaties and scraps of battlefield transmissions, none of them matched. This wasn't a known species. And yet the message was clear. Who activated the forbidden engine? Grayson stared at the screen. He didn't say anything. No one did. The lab was silent except for the crackling buzz of overloaded equipment. Then came the second pulse. Your kind was not meant to touch that fire. Outside, in the black halls of Earth's orbital command, panic was already blooming. Reports were streaming in, ships across the outer belt going dark, gravitational disturbances from Neptune's orbit to Lunar Base Alpha. Telescopes caught glimpses of strange distortions far beyond the Kuiper line, like folds of light struggling to settle into shape. The forbidden engine hadn't just worked, it had signaled. Grayson sat down, hard, his bones ached. He hadn't slept in 40 hours, hadn't eaten in 20. He'd been running on coffee and spite for days now, pushing everyone too far, promising too much. But this was beyond him. "Turn it off," Keller whispered. "Turn the damn thing off, before they come." Grayson looked at him like he was stupid. "It's not a switch. You think we can unplug the laws of physics now?" "You should have left it broken," Keller muttered, backing away from the monitor. He was probably right. But that wasn't Grayson's nature. He wasn't a man built to leave questions unanswered. It's what had driven him when his colleagues dropped out, when his son stopped writing, when his wife finally walked out and left him with nothing but empty rooms and notebooks full of scribbles no one else could understand. He had to know. Always. A chime broke through the chaos. Data. New data. The Vandal had sent a final burst before its comms went offline. Grayson pulled it up with trembling hands. Location: Proxima Centauri B, unstable orbit. Status: system error. Core overload detected. Nearby object detected. Unregistered mass. Biomechanical. Moving. Something was there. Grayson whispered. Something's been waiting. The general stormed into the room minutes later, flanked by 2 armed guards and a face carved from stone. "You brought heat, Thorne," he growled. "The kind we weren't ready for." Grayson stood slowly. "You wanted faster than light. I gave it to you. I didn't ask you to piss off the entire damn galaxy. They were watching, even before we lit the core. You think this tech just landed here by accident? That alien ship on Mars, it wasn't a crash, it was a burial, and we just dug up the wrong corpse." The general didn't argue. He just turned to his guards. "Shut it all down! Detain every scientist on this floor! Scrub everything!" Grayson took a step forward. "If we kill the project now, we won't stop what's coming. They know. They're awake. You think they'll let us sit still now? You should have thought of that before turning Earth into a beacon." And with that, Grayson was cuffed and marched out like a criminal. 2 hours later, every screen across the planet, military, civilian, encrypted or not, lit up with the same phrase. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a demand. It was a statement. Cold, final. "The species known as human has breached the threshold. Correction will follow." No one knew what that meant. But Grayson did, because just before they dragged him out, before they erased his drives and silenced his team, he saw one final line in the Vandal's corrupted data log. "They are not gods. They are not machines. They are the ones who remained behind to make sure this never happened again." And now, they were coming. They kept him underground. No windows, no clocks, no names. Just a room with white walls that buzzed faintly with energy, a bed bolted to the floor, and a single camera in the corner, blinking like it was watching but too tired to care. Food came through a slot in the door. No voices, no questions. Grayson had been here before. Years ago, when the engine was still theory and the only people listening wore medals and masks. But this time, they weren't here to listen. They were waiting to decide whether he'd ever see daylight again, or whether daylight would even exist after this. He didn't blame them, not really. If someone else had flipped the switch, if someone else had torn a hole in the rules of existence and painted a target on the entire species, he'd probably want that person buried too. Still, the silence grated, and the questions in his head wouldn't stop. Had they come through yet? Was Earth still standing? Had his son seen the message? Had he even remembered who his father was? 2 days passed before the door opened. Not the slot, the door. The guards didn't speak, just shackled him, walked him down a narrow corridor, and dumped him into a steel chair under harsh lights. On the other side of the table sat a man Grayson recognized. Colonel Brennick. Tactical intelligence. Cold eyes, tight jaw, like every emotion had been trained out of him decades ago. "You're going to tell me everything," Brennick said without greeting. "What it does, how far it can reach, and how to shut it off." Grayson raised an eyebrow. "It's not a nuclear bomb. You don't just flip a safety." "I'm not asking again. You can threaten me all you want. It won't change the math. The drive works by rewriting space-time for a fraction of a second. Once the change begins, space reacts like a muscle being torn, then forced to heal around the new position. We can't stop it because we've already done it. The scar is there now." Brennick's face didn't twitch. "We've had 27 alien signals in the last 12 hours. 4 of them didn't use language, just images. Whole civilizations, dead, cities glassed, stars collapsed." Grayson's throat tightened. "They're not threats, they're warnings. Messages sent by others who tried, who built their own drives, who crossed the same line. And now they're coming here." "No." Grayson leaned forward. "They're already here." Brennick narrowed his eyes. "You think I didn't notice?" Grayson said, voice rising. "The flux readings near Titan? The static bursts from Mars again? 2 decades after the wreck? You think it's coincidence the Proxima jump pinged something biomechanical on the other side?" Brennick didn't answer, which meant Grayson was right. He kept going. "We didn't invent this tech. We reassembled it, badly. And we didn't unlock a door. We opened a vault that was sealed for a reason. Something is on the other side of that FTL jump. Something left behind to stop species like us." "Stop us from what?" Grayson stared into him. "From becoming them." That word landed heavy in the room. Brennick looked away for a second, like the weight of what it meant finally cracked his military armor. When he looked back, his voice was quieter. "We've got astronomers reporting dark voids appearing beyond Jupiter. Not ships, absences. Like gravity is bending around something that doesn't want to be seen." Grayson nodded slowly. "They're not going to attack," he said. "Not yet. First, they'll watch. See if we try again. See if we push further. Because that's the test. That's always the test." "And if we do?" Grayson smiled. Bitter, hollow. "Then they erase us." The colonel stood, motioned for the guards. "I'll make sure you're brought back to the lab," he said. "Not because I trust you, but because we don't have anyone else crazy enough to understand this." Grayson didn't argue. He didn't need to. The truth was already loose in the universe, and no cell could cage it again. As they led him away, alarms began to sound in the base above. Something had entered Earth's orbit without being seen. No engines, no signature, just presence. And in its wake, every single satellite turned to face the same direction. Toward Earth. They brought him up during the blackout. The alarms were still going, but not like before. These were quiet now, more like whispers than screams. Emergency lights strobed along the ceiling as Grayson was led through the central corridor of Orbital Command's upper tier. His boots echoed with every step, the only real sound in a place that usually buzzed with voices and energy. Now it was silent, dead silent. Even the guards escorting him looked shaken. They kept glancing at each other like they didn't want to admit they were scared. Not yet. not while walking with him. The man responsible. When they reached the observation deck, the glass walls were gone, replaced by armored blast shields. But the feed on the main holoscreen showed what they were hiding behind those slabs of steel. It was floating just above the planet. Not a ship, not even a structure. A mass, cold, silent, shifting in ways that defied logic. It looked like a shadow, but not cast by something. It was a shadow that existed by itself. Like space had bunched up, curled inward, and started to rot in slow motion. The stars behind it flickered and twisted, bending around it like it was consuming light without touching it. Grayson stared at it. He felt something pulling at him. Not physically. Not mentally either. It was older than thought, like something inside his blood recognized what it saw and wanted to run. "I've seen that shape before," he said, almost to himself. The room turned toward him. "In the wreckage," he continued. "The Mars crash. There were etchings in the hull. At the time I thought they were math, coordinates, but they weren't. They were warnings." Brennick stepped forward, jaw clenched. "Can we communicate with it?" Grayson didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because as they watched, the shape began to shift. Not like a machine powering up, not like an engine flaring or a weapon charging. It peeled. A thin veil of darkness opened like paper tearing in water, revealing something behind it. No one in the room spoke. They couldn't. Because the thing that was now watching them didn't belong in any dimension they understood. It didn't even have shape, not in the way the human brain was designed to comprehend. It pulsed like a nervous system made of starlight and bone, bending space around itself in microbursts of gravitational collapse. Grayson heard a voice in his head. Not words, just emotion. Disgust. "You do not understand what you've done." His nose started bleeding. The others staggered. A technician collapsed to the floor, vomiting and convulsing. One of the guards screamed and fired his rifle into the screen, which absorbed the bullets with a dull thud like shooting into wet cloth. The voice came again. Stronger. "We sealed this path for your kind's protection. You broke the lock. You did not ask. You did not earn it." Grayson gritted his teeth, forcing the blood back down his throat. "We didn't mean to start a war." The air vibrated, not from sound, but from judgment. "You started something worse. You declared yourselves worthy." Grayson stumbled back, catching himself on the edge of the console. The pain was growing behind his eyes now, like something was being inserted where no thought had ever lived. "Then help us stop it!" he shouted. The voice paused, and that silence hit harder than any answer. "We are not your salvation. We are your correction." In the silence that followed, a wave of distortion pulsed from the shadow in orbit. It hit every satellite at once, fried them clean. The global net went dark in a second. Planes fell from the sky. Power grids screamed and died. For a brief moment, Earth itself went blind. Then it ended, and the shape vanished, gone like it was never there. Everyone in the observation room looked at Grayson like they wanted him dead. He didn't blame them, but in his gut he knew that was only a warning shot. The real response was still coming, and it wouldn't be something they could outrun. The cities didn't fall all at once. It was slower, meaner, like the universe wanted humanity to feel it, grind its teeth on every second, knowing the end was coming and not being able to stop it. The first hit was Mumbai. Not a bomb, not a weapon, just silence. Everything electronic died in one wave. Phones, cars, respirators, water pumps. The power grid collapsed in under 2 minutes. Over 20 million people went dark, and within an hour, satellite imaging showed something spreading from the coast, something wrong with the air. Chemical sensors couldn't classify it. people just started dropping. No screams, no fighting, just mass stillness. Next was São Paulo, then Lagos, then parts of New York, split in waves like someone was picking and choosing which parts of the species to turn off first. And all the while, no demands, no messages. Just that one line echoing across every recovered comm line. Correction has begun. Grayson stood in the ruins of the old lab now. What was left of it? The underground sector hadn't been touched yet. They'd managed to power it with backup fission cells, but even those were starting to flicker. Brennick had finally cracked. Not visibly. He still barked orders, still wore the uniform, but the way he looked at Grayson now, it was hollow, like a man waiting for a bullet he knew was already coming. "We've located the original Mars wreckage," he said, voice brittle. "Not the one we scraped tech from, the first one. The one buried deep enough no one wanted to touch it." Grayson looked up. The fail-safe. Brennick nodded. There was a beacon, still faintly active, sealed behind 10 meters of Martian ice, sending one signal, on loop. He played it, garbled, warped, ancient. But Grayson heard the phrase underneath the static. "Do not emulate." He sat back, shoulders sagging. So it was a trap. Brennick didn't respond. Instead, he walked over to the secure locker and pulled out a datapad, slid it across the table. "There's one jump left in the Vandal's prototype core," he said. "It was meant for a return trip. Remote recall. You can patch it from here, hijack the nav, and go." Grayson narrowed his eyes. "Go where?" "To wherever they came from," Brennick said. "Find out what this is. Find out if there's a way to undo it." "You want me to jump into the thing that's tearing the galaxy apart?" "No," Brennick said. "I want the man who broke the universe to go face it." For a second, Grayson said nothing. Then he stood. "Suit me up." The chamber was cold, rushed, no ceremony, no applause, just hard metal, flickering lights, and the dull throb of regret. The patchwork drive was booted up remotely. He could feel the core charging in his spine, humming like a warning bell. This wasn't like before. This was raw, unshielded, and barely held together by code held together with metaphorical duct tape. The ship didn't have weapons. It barely had shielding. It was a bullet aimed at the edge of reason. "Grayson, strapped in!" One final comm crackled through the audio feed. His son. "They're saying it's your fault, Dad." He closed his eyes. "Is it?" Grayson took a long breath. "Yeah," he said. "It is." The drive whined, warped the walls, bent light around him until reality itself felt like it was liquefying. And then it fired. There was no tunnel, no stars streaking past like in the movies, just void, absolute and consuming. For a few terrifying seconds, Grayson thought the drive had failed, that he'd died. But then the ship stopped, and outside was madness. A broken planet, or what was left of one, suspended in a rift of space that looped on itself like a Mobius strip made of collapsing time. Creatures floated in the distance, shifting between forms, reacting to thoughts he hadn't spoken. And at the center, a structure, black, breathing, a gate, the origin, and it was open, waiting. The ship drifted toward the gate like it had always meant to. Grayson wasn't flying anymore. The controls responded, but not to his touch. It was as if the very space around him had made the choice for him. Time ran differently here. Seconds stretched, bent, curled back in on themselves. His breath fogged the inside of the visor, even though the temperature read stable. His heart beat too loud, too slow, too human. The gate loomed. It didn't have size, not in any real sense. From a distance, it looked small enough to walk through. Up close, It spanned stars. It pulsed with something deeper than energy. Intention. A will. Grayson floated in the pod, surrounded by screens showing impossible data. Planetary fragments stuck in a gravity loop. Creatures, living things, suspended in non-time. Some of them were human-shaped, but wrong. Elongated, blurred at the edges, staring. He didn't look back at them. He couldn't. He stared straight ahead as the gate pulled him in, not with force, but with acknowledgement. It wanted him there. Inside the gate, everything collapsed. Not physically, not even mentally. It was worse than that. It collapsed in truth. Grayson stood, but not in the ship. He stood in a place that wasn't real, but more real than anything he'd ever known. A room, bare, white, smooth surfaces stretching endlessly in every direction, but it wasn't cold. It was exact. A consciousness shaped into a place. A figure stood across from him. Tall, vaguely human. No face, no features. A silhouette against nothing. But it spoke, not in sound, but in layers of thought and emotion all at once. And what Grayson felt first was disappointment. You were warned. You were all warned. He swallowed. We were desperate. The figure didn't move, but something behind it shifted. Images, whole civilizations breaking, beings falling into madness, planets twisted into geometry that couldn't exist in any dimension. Desperation is the beginning of every extinction. Grayson stepped forward, rage crawling back into his voice. We didn't start this. We found it. You left the tech. You buried it. Yeah, but not deep enough. The figure replied instantly, emotionless. Because we thought your kind would choose restraint. He laughed bitterly. You clearly don't understand humans. We do. That's why you were forbidden. The images behind the figure changed again. This time it was Earth, not destroyed, not burned, but still, lifeless, not dead, erased, as if humanity had never been there at all. Grayson felt his knees go weak. You're going to wipe us out, he whispered. We are not. He looked up, confused. You are. Then he understood. The engine, the jumps, the cracks in space. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even technology. It was a test. Every species that found it, every race desperate enough to pull power from something older than physics itself, was given one chance. Jump once, see what happens, and choose, stop, or go again. And every species that had ever reached that point, every civilization arrogant enough to force the universe to bend to its will, chose wrong, and erased itself. Grayson felt cold. It's a trap. The figure tilted its head. It's a mirror. And suddenly Grayson saw everything, not through eyes, but through a cascade of understanding that burned like lightning through his skull. The Mars wreck wasn't an accident. It was placed, left like a match beside a dry forest, to see who would strike it. And they had. Grayson dropped to his knees. Then why am I here? He asked, breath ragged. If it's over, if we're already dead. The figure stepped closer. Because you are the last voice, the final choice. And in that moment, a vision opened before him. Two futures. One where Earth burned itself into dust, trying to escape what it never understood. And one where it shut the door, closed the gate, buried the engine so deep that no one ever found it again. Grayson stood. He didn't ask what he had to do. He already knew. The ship was gone. When Grayson opened his eyes again, he wasn't in it anymore. He was standing on the lunar surface, helmet cracked, but still breathing. That alone told him what he needed to know. Reality had been altered again. Not broken this time, but rewound, reset, nudged back into a position just before the fall. A chance. The stars above him were clearer than he remembered. Earth hovered in the distance, Still alive, still blue, still blind to how close it had come to vanishing without a sound. He stood there, shaking, boots planted in dust that had recorded the footprints of every lie that brought them here. His head was screaming, his bones felt wrong, and something deep inside his chest itched, like the universe had marked him now, branded him for what he had seen. There was no time to waste. He knew what he had to do. Back at Orbital Command, panic was still spreading. The shadow in orbit had vanished just as silently as it came. Systems were rebooting. Satellites flickered back online. Most people thought the crisis had passed. They didn't know. They thought it was over. But Grayson knew better. The engine still existed. And it was still armed. 2 hours later, Grayson stormed into the high-security chamber where the Vandal's twin core sat, chained under surveillance, wrapped in radiation suppression fields, guarded like the crown jewel of humanity's future. They called it Hope 1. Grayson saw it for what it was. Doom rebranded. He didn't ask permission. He didn't wait for orders. He walked straight up to the primary terminal and began the overwrite sequence. Guards yelled. One raised a weapon. Brennick came down from the elevator, eyes wide, demanding an explanation. "I've seen where it leads." Grayson growled, fingers flying across the interface. "You think this is progress. It's a test, and we're failing. You think we can just walk away from this?" Brennick barked. "You want to bury the only breakthrough humanity's made in 100 years? I want to survive." Grayson snapped. "You want to end up like the others? All those species who passed this threshold and erased themselves trying to wield something they didn't understand?" A heavy pause. Then Brennick's voice turned quiet. "What did you see?" Grayson stopped typing, looked him dead in the eyes. "I saw what comes after the second jump." Brennick didn't ask again. He turned and ordered the guards to stand down. Together they shut the lab down. The core was disassembled, the schematics purged. The Mars wreck was buried under automated satellite strikes that turned its remains into glass. Every backup drive, every blueprint, every whisper of the forbidden engine, gone in hours. Some resisted. Some wanted the power back. But Grayson knew what those people were now. They weren't curious. They weren't pioneers. They were moths, and the engine was the flame. The news never told the truth. The world heard it was a system malfunction, a power failure, a miscalculation in deep space navigation that caused a cascade of satellite disruptions. No one mentioned what had really happened. No one spoke of the voice that had entered every mind that day. But the fear remained, quiet, subconscious, as if every person alive had felt something old, cold, and furious brush against their world just once, and then move on. Grayson went dark after that. No press, no legacy. He disappeared into the shadows of government silence, living off the grid, waiting to see if it was really over. And for a while, it was. But he knew it wouldn't last forever, because deep in the silence of the cosmos, beyond the reach of human light, the gate still existed. And eventually someone would find it again. Years passed, the world moved on, like it always did. People forgot. Governments buried the reports deeper than classified. The engine became a myth inside the walls of think tanks, whispered about in dark corridors, dismissed in public, but feared behind closed doors. New technologies emerged, new wars came and went, and Earth began healing. Slowly, awkwardly. But Grayson never left the shadows. He lived in an old observatory in Patagonia. Off-grid, no digital trail, no identifiers. Just paper, wires, and the rusted skeleton of a man who had once touched the edge of something older than time. His hands still shook some mornings, not from age, from memory. He spent his days watching the stars, not for beauty, but for signs, Because he knew. He knew someone out there would try again. And 3 years later, they did. It was a private firm out of Europa, independent, obscenely funded, run by egos instead of ethics. They'd discovered fragments of a lost data cache near the Saturnian ring, something buried in the debris of an old mining satellite. Grayson only learned about it when a low-band pulse crossed the deep radio silence channel, something no satellite should have been using. He recognized the signature immediately. Vandal-class energy curve. They'd rebuilt it. Worse, they'd jumped. By the time he reached the orbital link, it was already too late. The signal had gone dark. No return. Just one jump. One pulse. One final tear in the fabric of space. He didn't call Brennick, didn't report it, didn't speak to anyone. He knew the drill. Because when he looked up at the sky that night, the stars shifted. Just slightly. One constellation twisted unnaturally, like someone had turned it ever so slightly out of alignment. Like something behind it was watching again. The gate had opened. Correction had resumed. Grayson spent the last weeks of his life recording everything. Not for the world, not for his son, but for the next version of him, the next man who would see too much, chase too far, and have to choose between pride and survival. He left warnings, drawings, equations encoded in pure math, universal, timeless, undeniable. He didn't sleep much those final nights. Dreams didn't come easy anymore. Sometimes, when the wind howled against the observatory walls, he'd hear the whisper in the dark. That voice from beyond the gate. You were warned. But other nights, he heard something else. Not hate, not judgment. Something colder. Pity. The day Grayson died, the stars over Earth blinked. Just once. Every observatory logged it. Every telescope caught the anomaly, but no one could explain it. They called it a flare, a reflection, a glitch in the sensors. Only one man would have known what it really meant, but he was already gone. And now, the waiting begins again. Because the engine will be found. The gate will be opened. And humanity will stand at that threshold once more, where it will have to ask itself the question, are we ready now? Or will we do what we've always done? Light the fire, burn the sky, and call it progress.